Our main scripture passage this morning comes from Luke's Gospel, the 24th chapter. It is one of the resurrection stories. You may have heard it before. Now, on the same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. And while they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since those things took place, and moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near to the village which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. And then their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he vanished in their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking with us on the roads and while he was opening up scriptures to us?" And that same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together, and they were saying, "The Lord is risen indeed. He has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had made himself known to them in the breaking of the bread. Here ends the reading of God's holy word. May God bless it for our hearing and understanding. The walk to Emmaus was an escape. Two of Jesus' disciples left their hideout in Jerusalem to get away from the sadness. We don't know who these disciples were. One's name is Cleopas, but he's not mentioned in any other story. And the other is unnamed. They are as mysterious to us as Jesus was to them. When they meet Jesus along the road, they do not recognize him. They do not recognize him for the whole 7-mile hike, which, depending on the terrain, would have been 2 to 3 hours long. Very quickly in their walk together, the stranger asks them what they're discussing. Luke says, they stood still, looking sad. Their sadness is not just the sadness of grief, of losing a friend you loved. We had hoped, they tell the unrecognized Jesus, that he was the one who would redeem Israel. Not only had they lost a friend, they had lost all their hopes as well. And they had even heard that his tomb was empty. They tell the unrecognized Jesus that women in the group had gone to the tomb early that day, and they did not see his body, but they saw what they thought were angels who gave them a message that he was not here, that he had risen. These two even hung around long enough to know that some of the men in the group had also run back to the tomb to see for themselves, and when they got there, they too found an empty tomb, but they didn't see any angels. It was just a mean joke. Grief from the loss of a friend, deep sadness of having your hopes dashed, then watching them get flickered up with a hope, but that is pulled out from under them like a rug, as if someone was playing a cruel joke on them. These two couldn't take it any longer, so they leave. They take a walk to Emmaus to get away from the sadness, to get away from the pain. The walk to Emmaus is a road to nowhere. Frederick Buechner once wrote this about Emmaus. Emmaus is whatever we do or wherever we go to make ourselves forget that the world holds nothing sacred, that even the wisest and the bravest and the loveliest decay and die. That even the noblest ideas that we have about love and freedom and justice always in time seem to get twisted by people in power for their own selfish ends. We live in a fix-it society. The old Protestant worth ethic may not be as strong as it once was in our nation, but its legacy still has ramifications in our culture. I mean, think of all the DIY, the do-it-yourself television shows and YouTube videos that are everywhere about fixing this and that around your home or with your car or with relationships. Self-help books are still bestsellers. Attending a 12-step group or a common interest group or visiting a therapist are all popular ways that we do to try to fix ourselves mentally or emotionally or with social connections. When problems pop up in our lives, the first thing we want to do is to fix them. If someone shares one of their problems with us, our initial response is wanting to give them advice that will help them to fix it. This is the way we operate. But some things are not fixable. And when that's the case, we may fall into despair Or just walk away. Get away from the pain. In his book about Forrest's death, Sit Down, God, I'm Angry, Dr. R.F. Smith talks about how he and Faye, over the course of a couple of days after Forrest's initial injury, began realizing that the damage to his brain had been too great. There was no fixing him, putting him back together. There would not be a miracle. And while they still said those words and prayers, they started shifting their prayers from prayers about his life to prayers for their lives and for their daughters Becky and Rachel. And how would God be able to patch their shattered lives back together again? When you've lost a spouse or a child, as the Smiths did, or a loved one to death, that's not fixable. You can live again, you can laugh again, but things are never going to be fixed. They're never going to be what they were. Your loved one isn't coming through the door again. The situation in Gaza, both for the Palestinian people and the Israeli hostages, or the stalemate in the Ukraine, isn't fixable, at least not immediately. People are lost. Things are lost that will never be recovered. I don't know about you, but when I listen to those stories, I can't imagine the anguish those folks must feel. Or think more locally about those who've lost so much from the floods in the past few months, or last fall in the mountains of North Carolina from Hurricane Helene. So much is gone. Things will be rebuilt and repaired, but they won't be fixed. The resurrection didn't fix things. Jesus died and was resurrected, and he visited his friends and disciples several times. He revealed himself, renewed their lost hope. But he didn't go back to teaching crowds of people at the temple. He didn't go to the temple and drive out more money changers who came back after he disappeared, or do healings on the Sabbath. Things were not the same. Whatever Easter resurrection means, it doesn't mean all the messed up things get fixed. The other day, I was walking my dog in our neighborhood when I saw a neighbor's dog I hadn't seen in a while. As soon as I saw her, I knew why. She was now a geriatric dog. Their lab, who was a few years younger than our Ella, who died a couple of years ago at 17, sometimes played together. Now this old girl was kind of limping stiffly in their yard while her owner was just a few feet away weeding some flowers. Passing them took me back immediately to when our dog Ella was in the last year of her life, when stairs and hillsides were hard for her, and I would often pick her up and carry her. She hated being picked up. Maybe that was to do with the fact that she was 50, 55 pounds, and particularly our children were not always graceful in picking her up. But now she relaxed. Her frailty had made her dependent in ways that made me miss the days past and feared the days ahead. When she died, my 20-something-year-old children, who could hardly remember life without her, cried like they were 10 years old again. And it broke my heart. It wasn't just the sadness of losing a beloved family pet. I knew in that moment that I was watching the last twilight vestiges of my children's childhood. The sun had already set on that. But this was like the last colors of orange in the clouds. And I was so sad. So deeply sad that telling the story brings tears to my eyes now. Life can be so beautiful and wondrous at times that you just want to hold on to it as long as possible, right? Like cupping your hands, squeezing your fingers together to hold water. But no matter how you maneuver your hands and your fingers, no matter how tightly you squeeze them, the water always slips through. No matter how tightly you squeeze your fingers together, the minutes and the days and the years, they slip through. Life can be so beautiful, which makes its temporary nature so heartbreaking. We had hoped, the disciples said to unrecognized Jesus, that he was the one who would redeem Israel. It had been so beautiful. You should have been here to see it. It was magical. But it slipped through our fingers. By the time the trio reaches Emmaus, Jesus acts as if he is going along further on his journey. The two disciples invite him to stay because it is nearly evening, the day is nearly done. Surely he should spend the night with them. He agrees. At the table, Jesus takes bread, blesses it, and breaks it as he did at the Last Supper. And in that moment, they suddenly recognize him. And in an instant, he vanishes from their sight. The resurrection embodies the hope that Jesus has been resurrected, that death did not defeat him, that Rome did not defeat him, that the religious leaders who sought to shut him up did not defeat him. Yet it is a hope that couldn't be grasped. Jesus evaporates like a morning mist before their eyes. When I was younger, that story used to frustrate me. I wanted Jesus to stick around once they recognized him. I wanted him to prove that he was alive. I wanted him to go back to Pilate and scare him silly. I wanted him to go back to the religious leaders who tried to shut him up and begin teaching again about God's mercy and God's love right before their faces. I wanted him to go before all those people who saw him die on that cross. Instead, he vanishes before their eyes. He gives them just enough to change from despair to hope, but not enough to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt. I wonder, isn't that what he still gives us today? Just enough to change us from despair to hope, but not enough to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt. The two disciples who had lost all hope suddenly spoke of how their hearts were burning as they listened to him on the walk. The disciples who had been confused about all that had happened suddenly felt like the scriptures had been opened to them and they understood things in a way they never could have envisioned before. The two that had wearily dragged their feet, their sad feet, on that 7-mile journey, now ran back as fast as their young legs could carry them to tell the news of what they had just seen, of what they had just experienced. Seeing Jesus just for a moment had changed everything. They ran back, covering the 7 miles in probably a third of the time that they took dragging their feet all along that journey. And by the time they had reached their hideout in Jerusalem, however, Jesus had already appeared to Simon Peter. And Peter had told the rest. Now Cleopas and his partner tell everyone else about their journey, how they didn't recognize Jesus, but how he had told them so much about Scripture, and then poof, in the breaking of the bread, like the meal they had just had on Thursday night, they saw him. And then he vanished like a morning mist. These moments of recognition, of revelations, of appearings changed not only these two disciples who had walked to Emmaus and then ran back, but all who heard the stories. Jesus didn't give them proof beyond a shadow of doubt, but he gave them a glimpse, a moment that changed despair into hope, sadness into joy. Maybe you are thinking that you'd like to have a moment like that as well. You don't need a whole afternoon with Jesus, but hey, just that moment, I'll take that. A moment, and then Jesus can evaporate like a mist. But that's just it, isn't it? We do have those moments every once in a great while, right? In this story, Jesus breaks bread, like he had done at the Last Supper, like we do every time we serve communion together. He just broke bread, and in that moment they saw him. How many times have we taken communion and eaten it routinely, expecting nothing, seeing nothing? How many times have we prayed before bed or first thing in the morning and ran through those sentences like we're reading the grocery list as we're walking through the aisles? How many times have we entered this sanctuary or watched a sunset or visited an old friend or loved one and acted like, I've done this a million times? These moments are always around us, but too often we just kind of sleepwalk through them. The sacred of life is always revealing itself to us in countless ordinary, everyday ways. We just have to look, deeply look. Like the other day when I was walking my dog and saw my neighbor's geriatric pet. And it took me to a deeper place. Jesus revealed himself to those two in an ordinary moment of breaking bread, as he had done the night he was betrayed. And when he revealed himself to Mary Magdalene, he just called her by name. Just called her by name, as he had done hundreds of times before. And when Thomas begged to see his scars, he just showed them as if he had had surgery a couple of weeks ago. You know, pulled the nightgown up. You ever had somebody do that on you? Let me see my scars. Later, when he was on the beach, he just cooked fish for his disciples. All of those were just ordinary, everyday moments, but they changed their lives forever because they saw their sacredness. Frederick Buechner, who I've mentioned before, the late Presbyterian minister and author, wrote in a book that R.F. Smith gave me 40 years ago these words. If we are to believe that Jesus is really alive and all that that implies, then we have to believe without proof. And of course, that is the only way it could be. If somehow it could be proved, then we would have no choice but to believe. And we would lose our freedom to not believe. And in that very moment of lost freedom, we would cease to be human beings. Our love of God would have been forced upon us. And love that is forced is, of course, not love at all. Love must be freely given. Cleopas and the unnamed disciple thought that their lives had lost all meaning. We had hoped he would be the one. Jesus' amazing ministry had made them wonder if perhaps God was going to finally make everything right, make things the way it was supposed to, bring upon a golden age. And then, in a matter of days, it was all gone, slipped through their fingers. Jesus was executed by the empire without due process, without a fair trial. But in an amazing moment, the resurrected Christ met them on Easter Sunday. It was just a moment, but it changed their lives. Life can be so beautiful and so wondrous and magical, even in all the ways it is messed up. And it can fill your heart and bring tears of joy to your eyes, even as it can break your heart and fill you with sadness. And yes, it does slip through our fingers like water in cupped hands. But in those fleeting, sacred moments, Jesus is waiting to reveal his resurrection. All the death that ever was, set next to life, could scarcely fill a cup. He is risen. He is risen indeed. Amen.